Hi everyone, just waiting for a couple of minutes to see if more will join. Okay, I think we can start. So welcome everyone to the Genomic AI and Alan Turing Institute webinar series on AI in genomics. Today's session is titled Harnessing AI to Improve Care for Inherited Cardiac Conditions. Dr. Antonio de Marvao will show how natural language processing and large language models are being applied to real-world NHS data to turn unstructured clinical text into structured informations that can support patient care. If you have any questions during the sessions, please use the Q&A functions at the top of your screen rather than the chat. We'll come back to that later in the discussions. So thank you for joining us, and I'll now hand over to our guest speaker, Antonio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, and thank you for the invite and the opportunity to present our work. As Anna Maria just described, today I'm going to talk mainly about quite a massive research project that we have started and are carrying out under the Genomic AI Network of Excellence. I'm a consultant cardiologist, specializing in inherited cardiac conditions, so genetic heart disease. So this talk will be very much focused on that clinical application, but whenever possible, I'll describe how we could use it elsewhere. So we'll talk about how AI can improve inherited cardiac conditions care, and I'll give some examples which are a bit broader about cardiovascular care. So in terms of overview, we'll start by talking how we can use AI to find the rare, so inherited cardiac conditions. On the clinical translational side, on the NHS side, per se, we're talking about why we're missing patients. So what are the current human biases and the system gaps, and how AI could be the tool that helps address these. We'll talk about the methods we have used to extract structure from the messy free text clinical notes on the NHS, how that can be used to find patients, but also enable dynamic risk stratification, so near real-time risk stratification of patients. And then a little bit at the end, we'll talk how this could be applied not only to rare diseases, but everyday common diseases, and how several tools we developed during this program are starting to be embedded into real clinical pathways. So we'll start with the medical bit, just so that you know what I'm talking about as we go through. So our research program is built around genetic heart disease. So these are conditions that run in families because they are caused by genetic diseases that affect the heart's rhythm, the heart muscle, the strength of the heart pumping and the blood vessels. They run in families. They have this common characteristic that they often can have a first quite catastrophic presentation in people that were previously asymptomatic and young. It's a big constellation of conditions. Individually, all of them are rare. So I show you there some of the many examples. So DCM, dilated cardiomyopathy, about 1 in 250 adults, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, 1 in 400, and then even rarer conditions such as long QT or Marfan's, 1 in 5,000. Individually rare, but when we start putting together these numerous conditions, they actually are quite a common cause of heart failure or sudden death, which are unfortunately often the first presentation. And although treatments and management and surveillance changes between conditions, early recognition is key to improve outcomes. And I show you there just some of the NHS data that is used to diagnose these conditions. It could be from simple heart tracings, ECGs. Lots of them are diagnosed by imaging. So I show you there hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, an MRI of the heart showing the very thick heart muscle, ultrasound of the heart, echocardiography, often used for screening. I'm sure there are image under dilated cardiomyopathy, and then aortopathy, so diseases of the main vessels of the body, often also picked up in CT scans. But to diagnose these conditions, there's other clues, so blood tests, family history, symptoms that are not particularly specific. So to reach diagnosis, clinicians have to put all these different pieces together. How prevalent are these conditions? It's difficult to know for sure. The best kind of estimate comes from the work from this charity, which was started in South London now as a national charity, which is CRY, the Cardiac Risk in the Young. They screen young individuals, so teenagers and young adults have no symptoms. They've now screened over 350,000 young people. And the evidence shows that about 1 in 100 of these young adults, the young individuals they screen, have something picked up that needs follow-up, and about 1 in 300 have a life-threatening cardiac condition. And these are the numbers behind the prevalence of sudden death in the young, which is about 12 young people every week in the UK. There's also some data looking at incidental findings on the NHS. This is a study of CT scans, so people that were called to have a screening for lung cancer. So they had a CT scan of their chest. And what then these team of researchers did was look at the aorta, again, the main vessel of the body, for incidental problems with the aorta. So this was not the clinical question. So this was an incidental finding. And they report that about 1% of everyone that had a scan between the age of 55 and 74 to be screened for lung cancer had incidental dilatation of the aorta. And then they report how many went on to have surgery or other investigations. In terms of access to specialist care and genetic testing, right now the system is based on human decision-making, and with that comes biases. And I could show you multiple evidence of this. This is, for example, access to keyhole operations or replacements of the aortic valve. And in our community, where I'm based and where this work I'm going to present is based, we know patients from Black African ancestry are 8 times less likely to be put forward for these treatments than patients of other ethnic backgrounds. And there's no evidence that this is because of physiology or disease prevalence. It's just in terms of access, patients coming forward, but also then being referred for specialist care. So there are biases in accessing specialist care. What does specialist care look like? One of the main bases of care of inherited cardiac conditions is around the National Genomic Test Directory. This is a rules-based system. So I'll show you there, for example, for aortic disease, there's a series of guidance. So if patients have an aortic aneurysm, how big is the aneurysm? At what age does it run in the family? So it's several rules, and there's a big list for all these conditions that I briefly touched upon. There are these sets of rules. So if a patient meets the criteria, they should have genetic testing. However, although there's been a move to make genetic testing more accessible, moving away from clinical genetics clinics and inherited cardiac conditions clinic like my own, and to make it more accessible to other clinicians that are non-specialists, we still find in clinical practice that the vast majority of patients that are put forward for genetic testing and from then on the families are screened is rare outside specialist pathways, because it's difficult for non-specialists to kind of have all these kind of rules in the back of their mind if they're not experts. So they have a lack of confidence knowing when and how to refer. And just to make it slightly easier, we're talking the vast majority of these conditions are autosomal dominant, which means you only need a single inherit a single variant from the parents to be at risk of developing the disease. And in other words, if we find a patient and we then screen all their first-degree relatives, so their parents, their siblings, their children, 50% of their relatives could also be affected. And that's another layer of why finding patients early is that allows us to screen their families and find other individuals at risk early before they develop disease. So what are the challenges nowadays? Most patients we identified are only identified after symptoms develop. So we miss an opportunity for cheap, low-level interventions. And by the time we see them, we have to provide quite intense, expensive care. And sometimes there's already high degrees of disability, like following strokes or aortic dissection. So we miss opportunities to find patients early. We also don't make use of all the clinically routinely acquired NHS data. It is hard to read it all, is spread across multiple systems, GP data sets, multiple secondary care. There's a IT system for their blood tests. There's another one for where we write the clinic letters. There's another one for heart imaging. So it's difficult to kind of read it through and put all the different pieces together. Lots of people have the right tests, so the right imaging or the right ECG, but not in the right context. Like I'd give you that example of patients being screened for lung cancer. It's not usually, the rest of the information is routinely used to the best level, again, because is in most cases, the clinicians asking and the clinicians reporting are answering a very specific question, and some of the other subtle features that are picked up are not integrated. As we mentioned, genetic testing, family screening rarely offered outside specialist care. It's therefore hard to know how many patients exist and how many we're missing. Those are both patients that are yet to be identified, but also already in the system, patients whose referral got lost, not actioned. They had the test and then a referral was never made. There are systematic and individual level barriers to genetic testing, a lot around who to test, when, how, and because of all these problems, it's difficult to have like a cohort, a national cohort of patients with these rare diseases, so that we can then ensure that they are going into the right clinical pathway, both in terms of clinical screening, genetic testing, treatment studies, and randomized trials. So what we know is just the tip of the iceberg. All this is on the background, as you know, of the Fit for the Future, the 10-year health plan. And most of the work I'm going to show you is on the left-hand side, is very much part of the analog to digital move for staff. So it's about AI tools that help clinicians do their job better and more efficiently, and also about liberating staff from the time-consuming bureaucratic tasks. So about just over 2 years ago, we went to NHS England with a proposal about using AI to improve the identification, the risk stratification, and the clinical care of patients with these conditions. And we kind of can split it along three main axes. One is detecting and monitoring. So using AI to integrate at scale all these multimodal NHS data, clinical notes, blood tests, imaging, etc., to find the patients and to then risk stratify them. So what are the chances they'll have a complication? To do this in near real time, so therefore increasing efficiencies, automate time-consuming tasks that clinicians struggle to do and often don't do because they are so time-consuming. We wanted to develop tools that would support clinicians at the clinical facing a point of care through prompts or other decision support tools to identify these patients and then assist them in making the right referrals. When they do the referrals, to enrich the data, to improve the workflows in the labs. to make them systematic, so try to address some of the biases that exist in referral. Throughout all these, increase the efficiency. Right now, we have a one-size-fits-all care in inherited heart conditions. So patients are seen at regular intervals, say 1 year or 2 years. Tests happen in the meantime. They're not routinely integrated. Then patients are seen, either if they're high risk or low risk, at the same time interval. The clinicians sit there, look at all the tests in the different health records, and then the cycle repeats itself another year on. And what we would try to move is for more personalized care. So patients that need to be seen more often are identified, and those which are still the majority that don't need to see as often, particularly if the tests are reassuring, are given follow-up that is more spaced out. And finally, we wanted to use these tools to kind of learn from and to transform the current health system. So flag patients eligible for clinical trials, for emerging therapies, to build large-scale data sets that allows us to build better risk prediction tools. And we wanted all this to be using tools that are flexible, that are low cost, that could be deployed anywhere within the NHS, where the infrastructure really does vary a lot, but in some settings, it is not top of the range and not widely available. So we wanted to make a very low cost, low intensity tools that would be open source so that they could be easily distributed. And that's how the NHS, so this project of the Genomic AI Network started. We proposed 4 pilot conditions, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, excessive thickening of the heart muscle, which is diagnosed from cardiac imaging, clinical notes, blood tests, and family history. Aortic dilatation or dissection is tearing of the vessels. So looking for individuals that have a personal or family history of these complications, again, clinical notes, imaging. Familial hypercholesterolemia, so very high cholesterol levels. We get that from blood tests, but also from the results in certain types of specific imaging. And finally, dilated cardiomyopathy, the most common cause of heart failure. So the first challenge we have is how to find all these variables and all these symptoms and all these clinical variables that are important to make the diagnosis and to assess risk. And one of the challenges is that most of the NHS data, about 70 to 80%, is held as unstructured free text. So we can't easily look up a table and see which patients have or not have. We are notoriously bad at clinical coding, which is assigning a very specific code to a patient's condition. There's lots of missingness and incorrect labeling of comorbidities. So the tool we used and our partner is Cogstack, which was a company that is now spun out from NHS, was created as a partnership from King's College Hospital, Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, and then academic partners such as King's College London and University College London. Cogstack is a whole environment. So at its most basic, it is a giant data lake. It is created, again, using open source tools to ingest all types of text data, be that in clinical notes, clinical letters, PDFs, ECGs, also tabular data, blood tests, any type of spreadsheet. So at the most basic level is a data lake that collects data that is usually siloed and difficult to access across multiple individual softwares and systems. This is already super useful. It allows us to do things like keyword search, which is already a powerful, surprisingly powerful tool. But because all the data is now in the same place, in the same format, we can now start using or deploying tools layered on to start making sense of this unstructured. So we can use natural language processing And in the last couple of years, given the technological developments, we've been starting to use large language models to interrogate the data. And at the end, what we want is some sort of structured, standardized clinical terminology. And those could be things like SNOMED CT or HPO codes. So this is what it looks like in practice. You'll recognize letters, the type of letters that GPs and hospital doctors exchange, which is the main source of record keeping on the NHS. Each clinician does it in a slightly different way. It involves, diagnosis and lists, but also free text. So the way the clinicians talk varies. And the way clinicians describe condition, even the same condition, varies. So what AI allows us to do is identify or recognize clinical concepts and attribute a specific numeric correspondent ID. And even more powerful than that, than just finding the word, is the meta annotation. So is understanding context and see when that particular mention in the notes, if it is talking about the patient or a relative, if it's talking about a confirmed diagnosis or a hypothetical or a differential diagnosis, and whether this is past or future. So at the beginning, when we started using natural language processing, these type of models, we would do a training. So we would read through hundreds of notes and label these concepts. We are then able to create dashboards, so know which patient has each of the conditions we're interested. And even at this high level is a powerful tool. We can see for a specific condition, what is the gender breakdown, ethnicity, what medications are the more commonly prescribed, what are the comorbidities more commonly associated with what we're talking about, and we can easily navigate the cohort. And this, from a technical point of view, can look quite trivial, but is a super powerful tool to look after populations at scale. So see when the patient last had a test, and be able to act upon requests something specific for someone, something that was missed. But then we have to go, it is not the matter of just having a single model for a single disease. Lots of these conditions are diagnosed on a bunch of rules of meeting certain clinical criteria, but also can only be diagnosed if several other conditions are excluded. So I give you here the example of dilated cardiomyopathy, which was one of the most challenging. In the clinical notes, clinicians like myself, specialists in genetics, will describe the condition as dilated cardiomyopathy, while in other setups, clinicians might describe it at the phenotype, what they see on the scans. So they might describe it as left ventricular systolic dysfunction or dilatation of the left ventricle. They might describe it as the clinical syndrome, the symptoms at the end, which is heart failure. So all these might be synonyms or not. We would have to assess. And dilated cardiomyopathy is also a diagnosis of exclusion. So we have to exclude patients that have had ischemic cardiomyopathy, mainly heart attacks and significant coronary artery disease, and also patients that do not have significant valve disease, such as aortic valve regurgitation or mitral valve stenosis. So to kind of characterize a condition and to find all the patients with dilated cardiomyopathy, we would have to train models and understand the context around all these conditions and many more. And this is work done by my colleagues Pravina and Tannen. We then need to assess each individual model performance using traditional statistics, as we would for more standard analysis. So for each of these models, we assess what is the positive predictive value, what is the sensitivity, what is the precision, what is the recall, and we do that for the inclusion criteria that I show you there, but also for all the exclusion criteria. So all the conditions that we need to know of, and we have to be satisfied that for across the board, it is sensitive, it is specific, and all the conditions that we're looking for and want to exclude are good. So we started with quite simple natural language processing approaches. We would initially use word2vec to capture that similarity between the words and numbers. We want to understand context, so we want to kind of assess the text immediately before and after that concept of interest, and at the end we want to extract standardized nomenclature. So this early work we've done was trained on 1,200 documents and 4,800 annotations, and we got these type of performances. Every time we identify a particular weakness, we basically go back and continue to train more. And then we've been layering ever more complex natural language processing approach. What I would recommend if you're involved in this type of project is always try what would be not try to overcode or make your AI approaches overcomplicated. So try with the simplest approach that might be enough for you. So start keyword search, then natural language processing, and then on to large language models. They are, as we'll talk about, increasingly computationally expensive. So time and the actual infrastructure, and might be unnecessary to make things over complex for your specific clinical question. So this is another of our projects. Here we're talking about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Again, the same type of performance metrics. Here we use a variational autoencoder, BERT. This was not fully trained. So as the previous models, we trained every single labeling. Here the model comes pre-trained, and then we do fine-tuning on our specific clinical question. Again, it reads text in both directions and tries to understand the relationship between the concepts. We've trained this in a large data set at the Guy's St. Thomas's Foundation Trust, and then we deployed it at King's and also now other trusts, and you'll see that it transfers very nicely. With no specific fine-tuning in the new sites where it's been deployed, it still has very high performance metrics. But this has to be tested every time you deploy it to a different type of data sets. This is kind of a reminder of what I've just described. As we move from simpler, older approaches to more modern ones, the usual effect is that they perform better, they come pre-trained. So the context is generally found to be of higher accuracy, but it is the costs in memory, compute, the move from CPUs to GPUs is almost always higher, and that might not be realistic in everyday NHS practice if we want to design things that would run in basically each computer on the NHS frontline. So we'll now talk about our translational projects. As we said, we had 4 of these running in parallel. This is just the one on aortic thoracic aneurysms. Kind of the steps were the same. We train natural language processing models to identify clinical entities, dissection of the aorta, aortic aneurysms. We then deployed these models after being served of the validation at scale across data sets. So for this particular test, we looked at all CT scans that have captured the thorax to look for these, done a GSCT over the last 5 years to look for these variants. All the CT scans that had mention of these conditions, we then compared against the list of patients that have been referred for genetic testing or clinical genetics review. And the overall numbers are in the hundreds. So you'll see there patients that would meet the criteria between the age of 18 and 49 would be 242, and between the age of 50 and 60 were 319. So these would be patients that should have had genetic testing following the nationally accepted Genomic Testing Directory referral and did not. So we then went a step further. So we had already done like retrospective validation, looking at the clinical notes, but then we did one further step, which was actually invite a random subset of these younger patients and ask a specialist, so a clinical genetics consultant, to review, see the patient and indicate whether they meet criteria for genetic testing, and then we will report on the yields. This pilot is still ongoing, so we've seen 100% of the patients, so all patients that were seen by clinical genetics were found to meet criteria, so they were put forward for genetics. The patients are now attending for blood tests. We have 5 results. One is positive, so is a yield of around 20% was what would be expected in this population. And we've done the same for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, dilated cardiomyopathy, and are in the process of doing the same for familial hypercholesterolemia. So when we first talked to NHS England about this type of project, we were talking very much about natural language processing, but as you're all aware, large language models really came to be in the last couple of years. So we're also using that type of tool. So this is some work done by our fellow Ronnie. What I show you there is on the left-hand side is a clinical CT report. So this is how clinicians normally see the report of a CT scan. So it's a free text. And what we've designed the model to do is to read through all the information that is present in the report, looking in this case for aortic dilatation or dissection, and compare and look for all the variables required to refer a patient for a thoracic aortic aneurysm genetic testing. So you'll see it's extracting the age, is looking for aneurysms, is looking how big they are, is looking for other conditions that might explain the condition, for example, hypertension. Users can see the actual thinking process, and at the end you'll see a recommendation. So, sorry, let me just pause that. So we'll indicate whether genetic testing might or not might be indicated and the reason why. So it's explainable. Clinicians can see why this recommendation or the suggestion is being made. Another thing we're trying to do, remember, was to try to reduce bureaucracy and the time-consuming tasks involved in all these clinical pathways. So we also use large language models to assist clinicians once they want to make a referral to the genomics lab for genetic testing to collect all this information. So what this model does that I show you here is we can either link to the electronic health records or upload documents. So you could have standalone letters. It reads through, in this case was, I think, 18 letters. And what it produced at the end, it prints out this PDF on the right, which can be then reviewed by the clinician sent, which summarizes the clinical presentation. So this gentleman presents with left ventricular hypertrophy due to apical hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He has fainted. These are kind of the measurements from imaging. These are the ECG. And at the bottom, something that is quite helpful and that we do very rarely when we're busy in clinic referring a patient is putting all the HPO terms, so all the comorbidities labeled. The vast majority of referrals that get sent to the lab are basically query HCM or HCM, no real wealth of data. So hopefully tools like this will improve the number of referrals made, but also the quality of the referrals made for the lab. While we were playing with all these tools and over interrogating patient notes, we also developed a little tools like this that allow clinicians and other data scientists to interact with the notes. So right now, when you look at a patient's notes, you're basically scrolling down year after year, looking for that one specific report. What we've kind of developed was this type of tool to interact. So you can actually ask, as you do normally have experience doing with ChatGPT or Claude, is actually interrogate the notes. when was this patient last discharged, as I've just showed you, or when was the last echo, or could you show me the last X blood result? And again, we want it to be absolutely clear and explainable. So the model will then feed immediately where that bit of note came from and the link to the original health record. A very important part, or a key part, of how to look after patients with hereditary heart conditions is risk stratification. So like I told you, at those routine yearly appointments, all patients in low and high risk come, and then they look at a clinician looking at their screen and putting numbers into this calculator. So opening the echo results, extracting some measurements, opening the ECG and extracting some measurements, and putting on this risk calculator that then indicates what are the chances this patient will experience a sudden cardiac death over the next 5 years. And if it is above a threshold, the clinician will recommend an implantable cardiac defibrillator. So this is what routine care looks like. The tool we've spent a long time developing is automating this. Again, it could be plugged into whatever electronic health records you have, to a CogStack data lake, or you can download the documents and drag and drop them. It has all the same variables as I just described, and the model will look through the notes and make the calculation. So we'll get the age, you'll get the maximal thickness from imaging, etc., etc. The clinician is then able to click through and see where each of those variables come from and automatically calculate the risk. And this, because it is computational, can be done in real time. So as patients have their tests throughout the year after year, that risk calculation can be made. And if the patient is considered to be high risk, this would be flagged in the dashboard. The clinician would then be able to review if they agree with this automated collection of data. And the vision would be high-risk patients would see more often or get additional tests, while the low-risk patients that have had reassuring tests could remain under relatively low surveillance. And this is what I'm talking about being explainable. You can see at any point in the time scale, you can click, you can see why the risk has changed and where those numbers got arrived. So you can see it was from this specific echo scan that this particular number got removed. So everything very explainable and linked up. Again, all these things are designed for real-world deployment. So a lot of our time is spent looking for the least computationally intense model that performs well. So we do many of these experiments. There's some work Ronnie did and has published, which is looking at models from 1.5 billion parameters up to 70 billion and trying to find what is the most efficient model we can get away with that has good clinical performance. And here we show you, in this particular case, is a 14 billion parameter model that has satisfactory clinical performance at identifying patients at high risk of sudden cardiac death. So where are we right now? We have done lots of retrospective work. We've had this 3 pilots already completed of bringing a random number of the patients into clinics to see clinicians to see if this previously unknown diagnosis is confirmed or negated. We are performing shadow deployment. So at both our partner trusts, we are now trying to do these things in real time and then comparing with the notes and the decision-making made by clinicians. This will gather all the information to do a prospective validation. It is also very important for us to find out how patients feel about using these tools in their care. So all the patients invited for the pilot clinics are also being invited then for an interview with one of our colleagues to go through their experiences and what do they think. I'm really not an expert. We're still collating the final report, but I find it interesting that lots of the patients, one of the themes that has emerged is very many thought this already happened, that this was routine, that the system knew about all this and all tests got integrated. So to some, it was almost like a surprise that they were being asked. There's a lot of interesting themes emerging about trust and decision making. Are these tools to help specialists, or are these replacing specialists? Do we know exactly what the computers are thinking and how they're making? Also, questions which are incredibly important about biases. So I told you about the biases we know exist. When we're training data sets or models on the existing data sets, are we kind of exaggerating and making some of these biases more systematic? So very interesting work that hopefully in a future session we'll be able to share. And yeah, the vision is to move to a time where we have several of these tools running in real time, all these agents doing systematic risk stratification and highlighting patients in real time that would benefit from clinical review. And the next step is we are currently using AI tools to kind of establish a benchmark. So using the clinical variables that have been by previous research identified as being significant, but we're now in a world where we not only need to use the clinical variables that are easy to measure or that people have done systematically before, we can look at all the data sets, all the information. So it's time to look again and establish new multimodal algorithms. So find new variables that are perhaps more predictable. And this is work in progress and will be for many years. Good. Just in the last final few minutes, I'll move quickly from the rare to the very common. So my other clinical interest is cardiovascular disease in pregnancy. And we go from being rare to being highly prevalent. So cardiovascular disease is a leading cause of death in women. 30% of all deaths in women are caused by cardiovascular disease. And there's this huge mismatch between patients and even the medical community between risk perception. So if several surveys always ask women what they think they'll die, it'll be cancer always comes first, but cardiovascular disease actually kills 14 times more women than, for example, breast cancer. And high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor. So the one thing we need to tackle. There are very many well-established risk factors for cardiovascular disease. We have hypertension, high cholesterol, obesity, smoking, we know about that. But there are quite a few risk factors that are specific to women, including things like premature menopause or having cardiovascular disease during pregnancy, like high blood pressure or diabetes. One of the conditions I'm interested in is high blood pressure during pregnancy. That is currently determined by having a blood pressure above 140/90. So what happens in practice, if you have a blood pressure of 141, you're considered high risk. If you have a blood pressure of 139, you're considered low risk. And as we know, that all human conditions are a continuum, so that makes no obvious sense. And about 1 in 10 women that are pregnant experience one of these conditions, with preeclampsia being the most extreme complication. That is severe high blood pressure, and then evidence of maternal and organ damage. So damage to the mum's kidneys, to the liver, low platelet counts, fluid in the lungs, so pulmonary edema, or also affecting how the baby is growing. So quite a common condition with very high chance of complications for mum and baby. And those complications are both during pregnancy. So for example, if you enter pregnancy with high blood pressure, you have about a 26% of have preeclampsia, so that very high risk complication of delivering very early, of the baby being admitted to neonatal unit because they're small or they're born preterm. But also, very interestingly, your lifelong risk of having disease. So if a woman has preeclampsia, across their life course, their whole life, they're 2 times more likely to die of a cardiovascular condition. They're 4 times more likely to develop hypertension. So pregnancy is really like this amazing window of opportunity. If we identify all these women that experience these conditions, to then be able to intervene before years or decades down the line, they have the complications. Good. So from introduction to what can we do about it and how can we use AI? So one of the trials we're running with, again, the help of Coxstack, Meggie and other industry partners is improving the surveillance of women that have delivered, having had a complicated pregnancy with high blood pressure. We're doing a randomized trial where we are either offering standard of care, which is women get a piece of paper when they get discharged and say, please book to see your GP, and then organize follow-up yearly with them. We know that's very hard to do. Women find it very hard to access that type of care and to come forward. So rates are very poor. So what can we do better? We're going to test a chatbot and providing women with a blood pressure device. So empowering self-measurement and interaction with a tool to know what's normal, what's abnormal, what level of care. The tool also encourages women to do repeat measurements. And then we're going to go one step further, and we're integrating the chatbot with a wearable blood pressure machine to see if reducing that additional barrier of women actively going and measure blood pressure, but having a way of doing that with them at all times will improve 24-hour blood pressure at 6 months and reduce hospital admissions. Again, you've seen this large language model, reading through the notes all the time, looking for all these symptoms that preeclampsia can cause, looking for all the variables, the blood pressure, the platelets, the baby's growth, and then providing clinicians with, after integrating all these variables, with the chance of preeclampsia being identified and telling clinicians clearly why. So again, the clinical follow-up is quite scattered and at different intervals. It could be every 4 weeks a woman sees a midwife or a clinician. The tests can happen in between and not be picked up. So having a model to systematically catch these things, we think will be quite helpful at finding these conditions early and make sure they're identified, both to improve care in pregnancy and beyond. When we're using these type of tools, we can move from small cohorts to look at all pregnancy at scale across health systems. Here I show you some pilot work done at King's College Hospital over the last couple of decades, but we've now done it also at St. Thomas's, and we're now aiming to apply these tools in national data sets. So what we're looking is, we know of all the pregnancies, we identified all pregnancies. We are looking at what was officially coded, so what goes on the women's health records and to NHS England. We're then seeing in their discharge notes and clinical notes what diagnoses were made by clinicians. So the diagnosis was made, but actually the coding was not done correctly. So what's the gap? And then what we call technical diagnosis. So which women met criteria to receive these diagnoses, but things were not picked up. And what I can show you, and hopefully in just a few weeks, I will be able to present the final data, is that there is a gap. So there's a big gap between the women that were coded and had the diagnosis, and then there's another gap between the women that got the diagnosis and those that were missed. And it does seem that those gaps are not symmetrical. So again, there are gaps by socioeconomic background and by ancestry background, and again, maybe tools like this that are systematic would reduce some of these gaps. One final experiment we're doing, like I told you, all the care right now in terms of blood pressure in pregnancy is around these binary cutoffs. So either have below or above 140. That makes no sense. And some colleagues in America, Gunderson and all, have shown us that trends and longitudinal data and acquiring multiple data points is very important. So Fran, who's an AI fellow, recently used some of these tools to extract blood pressure readings in free text throughout the pregnancy. These were women that did not meet the traditional cutoff, so they did not go above 140. And you see here, as we allocate them to risk groups, their chances of complications of pregnancy are very, very different. So hopefully deploying these tools at scale prospectively will help personalize care. So keeping women that are low risk in low risk pathways, but be better at picking up high risk trends. Good. So hopefully I give you a whistle top of a lot of the work we're doing as part of GAIN, how we're using AI tools to find rare conditions, but also better manage common conditions such as pregnancy-associated cardiovascular disease. How routine clinical data already contains lots of the evidence we need. We just need to make better use of it. for earlier diagnosis and better management. AI really helps us kind of make the best of all this fragmented, messy, real world clinical data. How AI of electronic health records help deploy scalable, explainable phenotyping. We can move from static scores, binarization, assessments that are done at fixed intervals to a dynamic, near real-time risk stratification. And hopefully this will improve the efficiency of routine clinical flows. And we can move from being reactive, so wait for patients to have symptoms, to anticipatory care. We hope and are starting to show that early recognition does improve equity and prevention. But one of the big challenges is that it shifts costs from an hypothetical future, so from a very severe complication 5-10 years down the line, to more screening now, more routine appointments potentially done now. And we kind of have to work with the whole health system in kind of making our case that that is important. So I think part of the challenge is provide efficiency gains now and use that slack to kind of improve care going forward. And one of the ongoing challenges is really the transition into clinical pathways. So navigating all the governance, all the ethics, all the approvals to deploy this, and then engaging the healthcare professionals to, from the beginning, to design better systems, to identify what are the problems they have in their day-to-day practice, how tools can help them, and then scale the tools that work across the health system. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Antonio. It's always nice to see the little videos of the tools, and as I'm excited for the rest of the results as well. So thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. There's some interesting ones in the Q&A. So I will start with a question from James, who has asked, very interesting approach to find patients with TAAD who may be test directory eligible. Have you tried to extract further information to see if you can predetermine against score from the notes prior to seeing in clinic?
Yeah, so that's part of the kind of what we're now trying to do with this shadow deployment, is these type of risk scores and risk aggregation. The step would be collecting information, see which clinicians have then put in their clinical notes, and then there'll be an element of active prospectively asking clinicians to do that documentation and see how good our models are. One of the challenges for I think you mentioned the GAN score, but also the HCM risk score and other scores, is data missingness, or the way the numbers are described in the medical notes is not numeric. For example, a left atrium or something like that is described as dilated, where lots of the scores then ask for the number, but is not in the report. So things how to deal with that level of uncertainty and how to report it in a meaningful way that is getting the balance between sensitive and specific is kind of something we have to think through score by score. But that would be kind of the vision, was having all these scores and all this data aggregation and even summary of the notes available for clinicians before each review, be that clinic or just a review of documents.
Thank you. That leads a little bit into the next question, actually, which is from Sarada, who asks, would the clinicians review the outcomes from the AI models specifically for the ones that recommend genetic testing for TAAD? If you consult clinical genetics, does this mean the AI is instrumental in identifying the patients who qualify for genetic testing with minimal clinician intervention?
So we all set out all these tools not to replace clinicians, is more of a making sure the right, or the patients are being identified systematically, and then they are put forward for clinician review. We're not expecting these models to replace. They would be very much identifying put them in the right pathway, and then help the clinicians be more efficient by putting all the data available there, replacing some of the very time-consuming tasks. So again, each tool, and I showed you a lot of conditions and lots of tools. It would be a one by one deciding where they could do and how some of these models could be more autonomous for low risk tasks, but always with clinician in the loop supervising. Again, we are moving to mainstreaming. So clinicians with less expert knowledge of these conditions are accessing clinical testing. So this would be to kind of improve the information and the awareness of these conditions and of the pathways, not replace them.
Thank you. Sarada has also asked, is the AI system linked to EHR systems in real time?
Yep. So one of the challenges, and I didn't kind of dwell too much about it, is the data we've used for our retrospective analysis was from the data lake. So all these legacy systems, whatever EHR, be that Cerner or Epic, they kind of feed into a warehouse that we then carry out all these experiments. All this is technically trivial to link up. You just have to have buy-in and managerial support from the managers at each site to negotiate with the companies. So from a technical point of view, it's straightforward, very easy. Sometimes the big vendors are or are not interested, and that's just kind of more of a contract situation rather than a technical issue. All the things I've showed you would plug and play with whatever you use wherever you are.
Can I ask, does the sort of technical resource and infrastructure vary between sites on what it would look like to be able to plug that in to different?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't think I've explained it well. So lots of what we're doing in terms of the training does need more of the infrastructure. So we're talking about GPUs and kind of stacks of GPUs to do the training. What we are then wanting to distill down is very lightweight models that would be able to run in minimum infrastructure. So we're even talking like phones and CPUs on the desktop of clinicians. So the goal is really try to distill down these large models to what is the lightest one that works and could be deployed. And most of what I've shown you would be deployable for inference in either web interfaces or any cloud or in very light infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. And I will ask one more question just before we wrap up. So Alison has asked, are all genetic testing decisions by AI based on test directory indications? Because these don't always align with ESC guideline criteria for genetic testing.
So all our experiments were done for the genomic, for kind of the prompting, the genetic testing was using the UK testing directory. That's kind of what we set, but reset it to a different set of guidelines or an update is something trivial in terms of changing the prompts and just checking for the validation. Lots of the variables are the same. So yes, the experiments we've done and I've shown are to the UK guidelines. And in terms of the risk stratification tools, we've played with the ones that are more acceptable. For example, HCM, we use the European Society of Cardiology one. For familial hypercholesterolemia, we use the Welsh criteria. I think that's the one. So basically the most clinically routinely used risk score. But again, it would be trivial to kind of redesign them.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to do my virtual round of applause. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our participants as well, and thank you for your questions. And you will be able to find updates about our webinar series on our LinkedIn. And if you are not on our distribution list and you would like to be, please go to our website and you can sign up there as well. Thank you very much.